Welcome back to Fair's Fair! Today I'll be going over how to make your monster scary. Now, this is a much harder question than you might think. Most notably because it's incredibly subjective as to what people find scary. I, for instance, live with a cat. Strange feeling of something brushing my foot? It's the cat rubbing as it walks by. Footsteps and strange noises at night? It's the cat training for the Olympics. A loud crash or strange broken things? Just the cat destroying the house while I'm not looking. I don't believe in ghosts, but for all I know, I live with a very confused demon or ghost who thinks I've named him You Little Shit. In fact, if the reason that ghosts do things is to make people afraid so they're more susceptible to possession, could you imagine how infuriating haunting a cat owner would be? God, Fluffy really broke a lot of stuff lately. He even killed that repairman and... Stacked furniture. Maybe Fluffy's upset about the new house.
Are you fucking kidding me? Why? How would your cat do this? It was me, the ghost!
Fluffy, if you were hungry, you didn't have to summon a ghost. You could have just meowed. Also considering the fact that the cat will occasionally torpedo itself onto my lap from seemingly nowhere. Like, legitimately, I don't even know what the starting location was sometimes. But this is about physical monsters, because there's less question about the rules and less suspension of disbelief. A physical creature has boundaries, it is susceptible to gravity, it interacts with physical objects, and apart from a very select few people, most people acknowledge the existence of living things. Which is why ghosts might be easier to write, because they can be anywhere doing anything, with little to no explanation as to how. Though you can still fuck that up. If your demon is trying to possess the house owner and possesses a guest to scare them, then why is movie? But we're talking about monsters here, let's not get into ghosts. So let's do some do's and don'ts of monsters. Bear in mind that there are exceptions to every rule. Just because something is generally a bad idea doesn't mean it can't work out, just that it's unlikely. These are more like hedging your bets, increasing the odds that your monster will be scary to a larger audience. It's possible you'll follow none of this and still make it work out. Maybe. Or you could follow all of it and still have a non-scary movie that's tone is everywhere but horror. Pro tip, the Benny Hill theme should probably not be anywhere in your soundtrack. One suggestion is that you should have an understanding of what your monster can and cannot do. If you don't know what your creature can do, then you run the risk of contradicting rules you made up along the way. If you don't know what it can't do, then you're much more likely to have your limitation be stupid. And if you've made up rules along the way, then the odds of you accidentally writing in a new rule of your monster that brings into question earlier parts of your movie are considerably higher. You don't want to put a holdo maneuver of monster abilities into your creature. If your creature can teleport or destroy an entire fleet in one shot, then why are space battles, or why would the creature care about how far away the good guys are? It can just teleport to them. Imagine if super smart aliens that can't touch water invaded a planet without protective suits, covered in 70% of the stuff. How stupid would that be? I like the idea of the monster in A Quiet Place, but maybe don't display an easy solution to your monster in your monster movie? If you can't be heard next to the waterfall, why aren't you living there? But hey, why would you want your wife, children, or friends living in a place that monsters can't find them? Maybe the movie was actually a meta-commentary on an unhappy husband caught in a loveless marriage. Next suggestion, probably don't rub your monster all over the screen at the start. If the audience gets a constant clear view of the horrible monster, then it becomes less suspenseful, less unknown. Remember, everything you show is part of the story. If you don't show how they ended the world, then we don't necessarily know, and we have to suspend our disbelief. It's not great to leave that open as it's a hole in your world building, but that's preferable to showing on screen that they most likely couldn't have ended the world. You expect me to believe these creatures were able to navigate a skyscraper? Then again, I guess displaying flaws in their own story for no reason is just how they do Quiet Place movies. John Carpenter's The Thing did this part well. The creature could be anyone and always had the potential to be on screen, but you didn't know if it was. This is another point that ghost movies can take advantage of just by their nature. Ghosts are normally invisible. in most lore, so it's much easier to have the threat feel like it can come from anywhere. Though, small disclaimer, this works best for non-massive creature movies and for the horror thriller genres. I feel like that would take away from the tone in the Monsters Inc. movie if they followed this advice, and Cthulhu doesn't need to hide. That's kinda the point of him. That takes us to the next point. Make it hard to fight your creature. I made a video on how to make it a threat, but make it really hard to fight. The alien from Alien has powerful acid for blood. You can't normally go shooting up a spaceship, but with acid that melts through several decks, your options go down further.
It's got a wonderful defense mechanism. You don't dare kill it.
You also can't just stab it. Any injury is also a threat to you. In Aliens, the threat of melting through the hull isn't the main concern, but there's the issue of numbers. Good thing they didn't make too much in the Aliens franchise, or they could have overstayed their welcome and ruined it. In Underwater, the heroes are very outside their element. Humans fare very poorly underwater and in space. In Tremors, the enemy is underground. The very ground is no longer safe. I'm not saying these are necessarily great movies, other than Alien and Aliens. I will absolutely die on the hill that those are good movies. But these elements help make their monsters a bigger threat. But what about scary? Well, to diversify on scary, you need atmosphere and to work with the natural aversions that people have. When I said not to show too much of the creature too quick, you'd be working with humanity's natural aversion to the dark or unseen. One of humanity's only advantages is intelligence and the ability to plan ahead. If you know you're in danger but don't know what from or how to plan against it, your advantage is effectively nullified. Remember, people aren't afraid of being alone in the dark. They're afraid of not being alone in the dark. That's where your atmosphere comes in. You need to have an atmosphere of danger throughout to create an uneasy tone. Sound design, lighting, and cinematography will be very important in setting this tone. They use these things quite well in Alien to hide the fact that if you paused during the very few frames where the alien is properly illuminated, the suit that they had someone wearing is very, very obviously a guy in a suit. But through lighting and other techniques, they managed to make this hard to tell while watching the movie normally. But then again, remember, two things that are otherwise fine elements of setting a tone can clash very poorly in context. Like, say, random example, imagine if you have the dismal tone of bad guys breaking into the hero's base. Then imagine a good person talking about wanting to save beloved things and save their loved ones. These are fine on their own, but then if you layer one on top of the other in the context of the speaker saying that directly in front of the heroes they love losing their safety, the tone has malformed at whiplash-inducing speed into what could be reasonably considered satirical comedic timing. God, you know, if the Star Wars sequels gave us anything, it's a wellspring of examples to use on how not to write a movie. Let's do a bit more on atmosphere, though, because you can't just make the media dark and expect it to be scary. The best horror hits something deeper. The fear that those around you can't be trusted, and there's no easy way to confirm otherwise. The fear of insignificance and the inability to fight. The feeling of confinement or isolation. Existential questions about self. Or the question of whether or not you can trust your own eyes, the very means by which you initially experience a room, to be giving you correct information. The game Prey will have you counting every object in a room, and hitting them all with a wrench just because you can't trust them on sight. And to the game dev who thought it was okay for mimics to disguise themselves as medkits, come hang out. I just want to talk. I understand that it makes sense from a lore perspective, but from a gameplay perspective, it did terrible things to my mental health. Also pretty sure they put a not a mimic sticky note on something that was a mimic, so now I have trust issues. But Cloverfield had a decent monster, and no sequels that I'll acknowledge. The big one was well beyond the main character's ability to fight, and the little ones made it hard to hide. A story of escape as winning was off the table. Hell, A Wasted Concept used lack of sound quite well. If you've ever tried to be perfectly quiet, then you know it's a lot harder than it sounds. But most people could tell you that things being too quiet is, well, disquieting. Total silence is something that is incredibly unnatural, and when something so abundantly unnatural happens, this will very naturally result in someone becoming very uneasy with the area. Total silence is simply something that does not occur normally, which means if it is occurring, something is wrong. But at the end of the day, what scares someone will change from person to person as well as how much it scares them. So you should probably try to draw from a diverse set of criteria to get the best odds of hitting the right notes on people while still telling a good story. Which is why I believe that so many horror movies put in so many jump scares. A loud, sudden thing will startle most people. A catch-all to make sure the movie seems scarier. Though you're welcome to speculate your own theories as to why jump scares are so ubiquitous in modern horror movies. I can't prove what the motivations behind them are, but I'll stand by that too many are a detriment to your media. There's only so much time in any media, and if you spent it on jump scares, then you haven't spent it on establishing something deeper. Something beyond the monster will jump up and kill you. Feelings of confinement, lack of options, lack of trust, having to force yourself to act when you want to hide, being very out of your element compared to the monster. Those things are much more likely to have a lasting effect of fear than a jump scare will. On the other hand, don't overcomplicate your monster to the point of it being all the things. Even the thing could burn. And with all the restrictions on environment, you might accidentally remove any reason to think the main character could win without Deus Ex Machina stepping in. Unless your whole point is that the hero won due to something they weren't in control of. But, you know, again, context. Now, I realize that this video doesn't have a lot of hard rules. That's because scary is subjective as fuck, and whether or not any of these suggestions are done well depends on the context. A super sensitive hearing monster sounds terrifying, until you display a known solution that no one uses and make it flounder around on tables. Giant eagles not flying you to your destination sounds stupid until context proves it wasn't. This is because, and I know you've heard me say it in other videos, but I'ma say it again because it hasn't stopped being true, everything in your media is connected, and if it isn't, double check if it should have been there in the first place. Like in some horror movies, the third person soundlessly arriving for a pointless jump scare in a row. It's not a surprise anymore, it's the same thing you've been doing for half the movie. And so many horror movies follow such of the same formula that the first jump scare never gets me anymore because they're building up to something and I know it's gonna be just something completely unimportant. It's become formulaic. Even if it worked before, because I've seen so many, it's just stopped working now. Kind of like with the example with my cat. I've gotten used to it. Now, on the wrap-up, I love monster movies. That's why I don't review them much, as I don't want to second-guess if I'm being too kind. Even now, I look back at my underwater review and I think to myself, was I too kind, or did I overcompensate and go too harsh? My initial knee-jerk reaction is that I might have been too harsh on it, but at the same time, I just really love monster movies. I watched all of the Tremors movies. And it is indefensible whether or not the last ones are good movies or not. But let me know, what are some of your favorite horror monsters? Are you more of a ghost fan? Do you think some of these ideas aren't a best practice? Say so in the comments as you like, share, follow, subscribe, and click that little bell because YouTube doesn't understand what subscribe is supposed to mean. Why the fuck would I subscribe to any channel if I didn't want to know when they uploaded a video? But do those things or we'll kill more fair clones. We'll kill the young ones, just to send a message. Don't test us. But if you want to say how much you hate me and support blowing their cute little faces off, then you too can go down to the comments and be entertainingly angry.